Welcome to the Jaren Jarvis channel. I am Jaren Jarvis. Today, I would like to introduce to you 5 true scary stories from Reddit. Story 1, Look at Them Yo, Just by Dopamine. When I was a kid, my family lived a few blocks away from a crumbling overpass. It was blocked off and partially collapsed, forming a dangerous makeshift tunnel. Naturally, all the kids in the neighborhood turned it into a secret hideout called the clubhouse. The secrecy was great for me. I fancied myself a budding hypnotist, but my parents were fundamentalist Christians who thought hypnotism was demonic. So, I had to ply my trade in the dank underbelly of the abandoned overpass. To be fair, I didn't practice actual hypnotism. I was too young and stupid for that. I was into the whole "you are getting very sleepy" shtick, preferably performed with gumball machine yo-yos or my grandfather's pocket watch. The other kids played along happily, barking like dogs, kicking like mad horses, and spilling their secrets as directed. Unfortunately, the overpass's tenure as hangout didn't last long. Half of us refused to step inside after Mary Lou Pimentel insisted she'd seen a deformed hobo lurking in the back. The rest of us gave up after the police found a dead vagrant rotting in the tunnel. The realization that we'd been playing yards away from a homeless stranger spooked us all badly. It especially traumatized my little brother Braden. Sometime after we abandoned ship, toys started appearing in front of the overpass, plastic boats and keychains, broken Tamagotchis and stuffed animals swiped from graveside memorials at the cemetery. As if it was trying to lure us inside again. That was enough to make me give up on the clubhouse forever. A couple months later on the drive to school, I saw a big sandwich board standing in the mouth of the overpass. Candy-colored illustrations of yo, just glimmered in the sunlight. Underneath were the words, "Come back." I shivered and wrenched around to get a better look, but the sign was gone. At that moment, Braden began to cry. Our 2-year-old sister, Madeline, joined in. "What's wrong?" Mom asked, bewildered. "I don't like it," Braden wailed, pointing at the overpass. "It's scaring me." His phobia descended out of the blue and grew exponentially, to the point where we'd have to wrestle him into the car and endure daily screaming. The intensity, suddenness, and senselessness of his fits reminded me of night terrors. In Braden's defense, it was a creepy eyesore. If our neighborhood was a jaw, the overpass was a rotted molar awaiting extraction. My parents tried everything, but nothing helped. He grew steadily more terrorized and hysterical. He started hitting Madeline so he'd be grounded, because if he was grounded he wouldn't have to ride in the car. Words like institutionalization and violent delusions were thrown around a lot. One day I woke up and realized that my baby brother might not be living with me for long. "I don't know what to do," I admitted to my neighbor, Chelsea. She had baby brothers of her own, so she understood the unique despair that engulfed me. We walked through the neighborhood every afternoon. It was the only break either of got from school and families. Given the layout of the streets, our typical route took us right by the overpass. Against all reason, I'd been hoping to catch a glimpse of the yo sign ever since Braden developed his phobia. It was stupid, but part of me was sure the reappearance would meant it cured. "You should try hypnotizing him," Chelsea told me. I scoffed as the overpass came into view, dark and sullen against the bright landscape. That was stupid baby stuff. It didn't actually work. "That's not true. You hypnotized me once." I cried for a long time. Chelsea continued to speak, but I didn't pay attention. The sandwich board stood in front of the overpass, bright and unmistakable in the afternoon sun. My heart quickened and I ran ahead. The candy-colored yo-jos were the same, but the words had changed. "For you." Piled on the ground were cheap toys, sticky hands and silly putty, star-spangled bouncy balls and translucent plastic animals. And on top of it all, gleaming like a gemstone, was a bright green yo-yo. I snatched it up and shoved it into my pocket before Chelsea could see. She approached, panting. "What is this?" Hobo Santa left more presents. Chelsea gave an affected little shudder. "Let's get out of here." I followed her down the road, but I glanced back, unable to help myself. The sign was still there, benign and cheerful. For you. I smiled. Maybe it was Hobo Santa. Maybe it was God. Whatever it was, it knew I liked hypnosis. It knew I liked Yo, Joss. And it knew Braden was afraid. I got home and found Braden napping fitfully on the sofa, cuddling a mound of blankets and stuffed animals. Madeline sat by his feet, wide-eyed and melancholy. Triumph and excitement welled inside me as I shook Braden awake. He looked at me blearily, grey eyes bloodshot and unfocused. "Bray," I said urgently, "look at this. Follow it with your eyes." I swung the green yo-yo back and forth. He tracked it obediently. "When I touch your shoulder," I said, "you're going to fall asleep." Back and forth, back and forth. I counted to 60 and patted his shoulder. His eyes immediately closed. "When you wake up, you won't be scared of the clubhouse anymore." The overpass filled my mind, a crumbled monument to urban decay that bled shadows. "You'll actually like it." In my mind's eye, the overpass brightened. Wildflowers replaced the shadows, and the mossy concrete became clean and smooth. No more fear. Back and forth, back and forth. I felt myself drifting, sliding into a pleasantly blank state. I shook myself and said, "Wake up." Braden shot up, eyes wide with confusion and fear. Then he relaxed and smiled. To my amazed delight, his terror evaporated. It was like the last few months had never happened. For a few weeks, Braden paid the overpass no attention to the overpass whatsoever. Until one Friday morning on the way to school. The sign was back. White sandwich board painted with Yo, Joss and another message. "Let's eat." Braden spun around and stared, mouth falling open. His eyes misted and his lip trembled. Then he smiled and settled back into his seat. Our parents left for a weekend trip the next day, leaving me in charge. Everything was fine, Madeline was calm, Braden almost preternaturally so. Just after lunch, Braden plopped down beside me and said, "Let's go play in the clubhouse." A small, electric chill crawled down my back. Braden watched me with a bland smile. "No," I said. "It's too dangerous. Remember the dead guy? He's not there anymore." "No. Mom would kill me. But I want to go." I told Madeline we were going to play in the clubhouse. "We're not going." Braden latched onto my arm, gouging the soft skin with his nails. "Let's go now," he screamed. "Let's play. Let's eat." I smacked him. The meaty crack made my heart stop. Braden froze as a red handprint bloomed across his face. Then his eyes filled with tears and he ran upstairs. I knew what I had to do. I left Madeline crying on the sofa and rushed to my room. After several moments of frantic searching, I finally found the yo-yo under a pile of dirty clothes. It felt weirdly warm. I frowned, checking the clothes pile for the culprit, an overheated power strip. Or, God forbid, a rat? Suddenly the yo-yo shuddered. I stared, confused and repulsed. It shuddered again, hopping in my palm like an oversized jumping bean. Then it split, plastic folding and wrinkling weirdly, and opened to reveal a quivering green eye. I hurled it across the room, then grabbed a dirty T-shirt and dropped it over the yo-yo. Before I could lose my nerve, I scooped it up and carried it outside. It twitched and jumped within the folds, making me think of a giant cockroach. I threw it into the trash bin and skittered away just as a sharp clatter sounded overhead. I looked up, startled, just in time to see Braden retreating from his window. I bolted into the house and tore upstairs. The second my feet touched the upper landing, Braden's door flew open and charged at me, knocking me down the stairs. I tumbled and hit the landing in an explosion of disoriented agony. Braden ran past, giggling wildly with Madeline in tow. She sidestepped me guiltily, pink skirt swishing behind her. And before I could so much as twitch, they darted out the front door. I forced myself to my feet and stumbled outside. The trash bin was overturned, contents gleaming wetly in the sun. The yo-yo was gone. Braden and Madeline were nowhere in sight. I reached the overpass a few minutes later, panting and wincing with every step. The sandwich board was back. No words this time, just a gleaming, candy-colored cascade of painted yo-jos. The entrance loomed behind it, soft and black and bleeding darkness. Fear reared up, threatening to tear me apart from the inside out. Then I took a deep breath and went inside. I heard Madeline's shrill sobbing immediately. "Look!" Braden snarled. "Look!" I found them near the back. Madeline lay crumpled on the filthy ground, inches away from a pile of broken concrete. Braden crouched before her, shoving the yo-yo into her face. "Look up! Look at this now! Leave her alone!" My voice echoed through the overpass like a commandment from God. Madeline fell abruptly silent. Braden shoved her away and smiled. "Did you come to play?" he asked in a brittle, bright voice. "If you didn't come to play, you'd better go." "Come here," I said. "Right now." Without changing expression, Braden snatched a huge piece of concrete, far too big for him, far too heavy, and ran at me. I tried to run, but tripped. He swung. The concrete collided with my head, heavy and horrifically solid, too painful to fully comprehend. The last thing I saw was Braden's face, alight with rage. Then everything went dark. I woke around dusk, sore and itchy. For a second I couldn't figure out why I was slumped on the grass. Then it all crashed down at once and I shot to my feet, stumbling as vertigo swept over me. My head pounded in time with my heartbeat, creating small, pulsing explosions of pain. I wasn't under the overpass. I was behind it. It loomed before me, a concrete hillock sprouting shadows and weeds. As I watched, the concrete changed color before my eyes, red and blue. Red and blue. Back and forth. It took a long time for me to realize they were police car lights. I ran around the overpass and skidded to a halt amid a tangle of emergency personnel. As I watched, two paramedics loaded a sheet-covered stretcher into the back of an ambulance. Without thinking, I darted forward and pulled it away. What the, no. A pair of strong hands grabbed my shoulders and forced me to turn around, but not before I saw what was on the stretcher. Tiny, bloated and somehow soggy, with puffy, mottled skin. Blood and thick, black fluid stained the pink dress. A broken jaw swung madly, hanging from a string of pulpy sinew. "Madeline!" I screamed until they sedated me. Then I slept for what felt like days. Shortly after Madeline died, the city demolished what remained of the overpass and put the lot up for sale. No one ever bought it. We never found Braden. But I came back to town a few days ago. My parents moved a long time ago, but my friends lived there still. I met up with Chelsea at a nearby bar. Tipsy and high on the mild euphoria peculiar to lifelong friendship, we decided to walk around our childhood neighborhood for old times' sake. As we approached the empty lot, something glimmered phantom, pale in the darkness, a blank white sandwich board. And taped to the front, a faded green yo-yo. Story 2, my cellmate in prison was a serial killer by related Tao H's. First off, I want to make one thing clear, I never hurt anyone except for myself and several large corporations who could afford to lose some cash. In 2000, at the age of 18, I decided to run a fake lending business to large corporations that I knew were scamming innocent people who could barely afford to pay their bills. You know, those types of companies that said they'd throw you into jail if you didn't pay your medical bill from 6 years ago. Things started out great. I landed a big deal with one of the largest debt collections in the Chicago area. I'd start by giving them 10% down, which is all I really ever had. By the time I ended my 3-year scam, I was up to $3 million and hadn't planned on returning the cash to any of those companies. I moved to Connecticut and stayed with my grandmother for a few months. About the 6th month in, the feds were knocking on my grandma's door and that's when they took me away in the handcuffs. I was transported back to Chicago and taken to the federal state prison there. White. One is the guards called, motioning me forward. I'd sleep with one eye open tonight, the woman said, pushing me forward. They didn't only strip me of my clothes, they took away all of my pride and dignity. For a while there, I didn't have a roommate to bunk with. It was nice. I mostly kept to myself and avoided making eye contact with anyone. I had one friend, Colleen. She kept me sane and warned me about the dangerous inmates. Colleen was also put into for petty theft, but that didn't mean that all the people behind bars were all too innocent. There were murderers and rapists surrounding us in Ward C. Everything changed 3 months in. I was finally starting to feel safe until I was given a roommate. I watched as she walked around the prison. None of the inmates whistled or howled at her like they'd done to me my first week. She was quite short but stout in her stature. Her dead blue eyes scanned the room. I could tell that this woman had seen some serious shit in her day. "I'm Nicole," I said. "This bed here is yours." She didn't reply. Instead, she glared at me with those cold, dead eyes. I got the feeling that she wasn't in the mood to talk. Later that night at dinner time, Colleen called me over to her table where she was sitting with a few of the regulars who were in and out of prison every few months or so. "Nicole, right?" one red-headed woman with a swastika tattoo asked me. "Yeah," I said, trying not to look at her tattoo, which made me feel extremely uncomfortable. "That new bunkmate of yours, you better stay away from her," another woman added. "Listen to me," Colleen said, pushing me down on the seat. "That lady isn't like us. Word around the street is that they ran out of space in the maximum security prison, so they brought a few inmates here." So, I paused. "What did she do?" "Bitch is crazy. She's a serial killer," Colleen whispered. "Fuck," I say, leaving the cafeteria. I search for the metal hair clip that I hid in my pillowcase, but I come up empty-handed. Just then, I saw her in the corner of my eye. "What are you looking for?" she asked. "Oh, just a tampon," I say wearily. Just then, she pulled out the clip from inside her pants. "Good, 'cause I'll be needing this tonight," she said, smiling. That night after the guards did their rounds, I made sure to not fall asleep. I stayed up as long as I could, only to wake up with that bitch's hands wrapped around my neck. "Let me do my business here and I'll leave you alone," she said, getting off of me. "What do you want?" I asked. "To kill, and I need help killing. You provide me with what I need and I'll keep you safe." I stuttered to breathe in between talking. "How many people have you killed?" "7. But I don't like uneven numbers," she said, clicking the hair clip repeatedly. "Don't make me choose you to be number 8. She crawled back into her bunk and whistled a tune as a single tear fell from my face. "Okay," I whispered. Over the next few weeks I found out more about my bunkmate. She killed 6 campers in one night with a blunt knife. Her other victim was her husband, whom she'd been married to for 15 years. She bit his face off to death. Some of the nights I'd wake up with her sitting on the edge of my bed humming a tune to herself. Others nights, I'd find her staring blankly at me from her bunk. She's hang upside down like a fucking bat and just stare. I started to think it was all talk until she woke me up at 2 a.m., blood splattered on mouth and hands. "What the fuck?" I said, frightened. "I'll be requiring more of those hair clips." "Or a hammer," she said, wiping herself off with tissues. I watched her all night. The next morning the guards found one of the prisoners dead. She had bled to death with multiple contusion wounds on her chest and face. The guards questioned all of us, but I kept my mouth shut, at first. I knew that sooner or later I would be an accomplice and get even more time, perhaps be sent to a maximum security prison once there was room. Instead, I went to the head officer and told the truth. The woman was taken to a small holding cell and I was told she wouldn't be getting out anytime soon. I was released 3 weeks later for good behavior. I'd like to think that the shit I've seen would change me for the better, but these dark thoughts are starting to take over. Story 3, This Key is for the Woods by Coffin Bidder. I shall start by telling you, my grandmother is a witch. She first told me this when I was a child. As I grew older, the belief I once had faded. It wasn't until she was on her deathbed, when she gave me the key, would I once again believe. No. That I would know she had told me the truth. The call came from my mother early on a Sunday morning. My grandmother had had a heart attack, and was in the hospital. I quickly threw on my clothes, slipped on my winter boots, hopped in the car, and headed for the hospital. My grandmother and I were very close, though I hadn't seen her in a few weeks. I was planning on visiting her in the upcoming week, but now that idea was entirely struck from my mind. I had to go to her now. When I arrived at the hospital, my father was waiting for me in the lobby. He pulled me in, hugging me tight. I could tell he wasn't handling his mother's condition well. Seeing him this way caused a few tears to run down my face, completely stripping me of my will to hold myself together. Upon entering her room, she was asleep. There was an IV in her arm, and she was hooked up to a heart monitor. I looked at the screen, her heartbeats were slow, spaced out. I grabbed a chair from the other side of the room, and moved it to her bedside. I sat, looking at her for a moment, and began to cry quietly. Seeing her this way broke my heart, and I wanted nothing more than for my grandmother to get well again. Some time passed before she opened her eyes. She looked at me, a slight smile gracing her face. Slowly, she reached out her hand. I quickly met her with both of mine, and held hers tight. "I'm so glad you came, darling. They couldn't keep me away even if they tried," I replied, smiling. A few tears still rolling down my cheek. My grandmother looked to my parents, who were standing by the door. "Would you mind giving John and I a moment? I must tell him something very important." My parents nodded in agreement, and exited the room, closing the door quietly behind them. She looked back to me. "John, I am going to die." I shut my eyes, trying to hold back more tears from rushing out of me. "Don't say that, Grandma. You're gonna get better. I know you will." She shook her head slightly. "John, my time is coming. Nobody lives forever. At least my life was well lived, and I had such a great grandson to keep my company. There is something I must ask of you. Something that must be done. Can you promise me you'll do it?" "Anything, Grandma." "What is it?" My voice cracked a bit as the urge to cry again came over me. She pulled her hand away, and reached into the pocket of her hospital gown. She pulled out an unusual-looking key. Taking my hand, she placed the key gently on my palm, and wrapped her hand around mine. "This key is for the woods," she began. "Do you remember the forest we used to walk through when you were younger?" I nodded my head yes. "Do you remember the tree that had been painted on?" I nodded yes. "You must go to that tree, unlock the hidden door, and enter it. You'll find yourself in a strange and unusual place. My home. Follow the path to its end. There'll be a hut. Inside the hut, an urn. I wish for you to bring it back here, to your parents. Your father will understand." "Okay. Okay, Grandma, I'll get it for you. You should go, John. You have a long journey ahead of you. And I must get some rest." I stood up and kissed my grandmother's forehead. She turned onto her back and closed her eyes. As I exited the room, I was met with a hug from my mother. She tried to assure me that my grandmother would be fine, but I knew it wouldn't. I knew her time in this world was coming to an end, and as sad as that made me, I knew she would finally be at rest. I didn't want her to go, but the will of nature has no rival. 30 minutes later, I arrived at the edge of the woods. I had been here so many times when I was younger, but something about this time made it feel as if it was the first. I exited my car and rummaged through my pockets for the key my grandmother had given me, making sure I didn't misplace it. I opened up the trunk and pulled out an old, navy blue sweatshirt my father had gotten me a year or so back for Christmas. The deeper into the woods I went, the colder it got. I zipped up my sweatshirt and pulled my sleeves over my hands, hugging myself. As I wandered, I looked for the tree that had been painted on. It was maybe an hour or so before I found not one, but two painted trees. Both trees were painted in vibrant colors, blue, green, yellow, orange, and pink. This tree had always been the only painted one, so I never bothered to remember which tree along the path it specifically was. Now that there were two trees, painted very similarly, I couldn't for the life of me remember which one I had grown up visiting with my grandmother. I looked back and forth at the painted trees. It then occurred to me. The tree my grandmother was talking about would be the one with some kind of keyhole. I picked a tree and began combing over it. I traced my fingers along the bark, looking for some kind of indication of a hole. There, at the base of the trunk. A hole in the paint. I knelt down, took out the key, and inserted it. When I twisted it, I heard a pop from the other side of the tree. When I peeked around the corner to see what it was, a small door had cracked itself open. I crawled into the tree. It was dark. I felt around me to see if there was some kind of second door, or maybe even a light. The door I entered through suddenly closed. Panicking, I began throwing myself against it, desperately trying to free myself. In an instant, I began to fall. It was as if the ground underneath me had given way. I was falling through utter darkness. After a moment of this, a bright light appeared, blinding me. As I slowly opened my eyes, I realized that I was somewhere completely different. I looked above me only to see sky. I looked down and around me. The world beneath me looked magical. Plants I had never seen, in vibrant colors I had never thought possible in nature. Animals grazing in a field that were more beautiful than any others. Just beneath me, a shimmering purple pond. It didn't even hurt when I hit the surface. After swimming back up and making my way to land, I took a moment to look around and admire the beauty that lay before me. A path of finely placed golden bricks lay in front of me. The path my grandmother told me to follow, I thought to myself. The walk wasn't long. Minutes passed by and a small hut came into view. The roof was made of twigs, orange and yellow leaves, and vines. The walls were made of what appeared to be pink clay. The door was a beautifully carved dark brown wood, with a small stained glass window near the top. Entering the hut, I was met with the pleasant smell of freshly baked cookies. I looked around to see if anyone was here, but the place was empty. I looked around for the urn, finding it in a small bedroom in the back. It sat on a bedside table made entirely of glass. I picked it up, looked over it, and made my way back towards the front door. Back outside, I noticed that the grass and bushes along the path were beginning to die. Leaves on nearby trees began to turn brown. I looked back to the hut. I don't know how, but it was starting to melt. Suddenly, the roof caved in. As it did, a loud growl came from the woods behind the hut, followed by footsteps that shook the ground. I didn't know how to leave this place, but I figured maybe I could hide somewhere by the lake I had fallen into. I began running back up the path. Once at the lake, I looked around for a place to hide. Seeing nothing that would shelter me, I dove into the lake. I peeked my head up to see what had startled me back at the hut. It was a very tall and fat, blue-furred bear, walking on its back legs. It was at least 15 feet tall. It spotted me. I turned to swim to the other side of the pond. I turned to look back at the bear, just as it was getting into the water. I hopped out and ran. The ground began to shake. I turned back to see the bear running on all fours. Turning back in the direction I was running, I slammed into a tree and fell to the ground. As I scurried back to my feet, a figure in long grey rags emerged from the tree I had run into. The stranger's hair was long and white. In their left hand was a long wooden stick with a glowing red gem jammed into the top. The stranger moved in front of me, the bear still running full speed at us. Slowly, the stranger lifted the stick and slammed it into the ground. There was a bright flash of red from the gem. When it faded, the bear had stopped right in front of us, and was sitting, painting with its tongue out. The stranger turned to me. It was a woman. Her face was wriggly, and her nose stuck out unusually far. She smiled at me, then reached out her hand to me. I took her hand and she helped me to my feet. "Thank you. Anything for Mary's family." The old woman replied. "How did you know I'm related to Mary?" The woman laughed. "You have her eyes. She's your grandmother, correct? You'd be older to be her son." "Yay." She asked me to grab this urn from the hut and bring it to my father. I handed her the urn I had been hugging like a football while running. The woman let out a sigh, her eyes sadly looking over the urn. "Is she sick?" "Yes," I replied. "Is she comfortable?" "Yes." The woman let out another sigh before forcing a smile onto her face. "All right. How's about we get you home then? This place is not meant for someone like you, even being Mary's grandson. Take my hand. I grabbed her hand. She turned and said goodbye to the large blue bear, which she called Cuddles. With the tap of her stick and a red flash of the gem on top, we were back in the woods standing between the two painted trees. Alrighty then. You tell your grandmother I said hello, and goodbye. I will. May I ask something before you go? Yes? The hut. When I left it, it began to melt and the roof caved in. The trees, bushes, and grass all began to die. What caused it? Was it the bear? Cuddles, I mean? No, no. You see the other tree with paint on it? She pointed her stick at it. I nodded yes. That tree has a similar door, opened by the same key. It brings you to a sort of parallel to where we just were, only much worse. Your grandmother and I spent the last 50 years keeping its horrors from merging into our lands, but now that she is dying, our guard is weakened. Be glad you didn't enter that place. If you were terrified of Cuddles, you would surely die of shock just stepping into that place. I looked at the painted tree opposite. A quick sensation of fear rushed through me. If I had picked that tree I would be dead. Just like that. What will you do to fight it without my grandmother? Nothing. I will abandon our home and move to a new forest. Find another witch, and prepare for the inevitable. Its return. She looked blankly at the dirt for a moment, then back up to me. She nodded her head, turned, and began to walk away. Just as I turned to walk away, the woman shouted to me. Tell this to your grandmother to me. Death is not the end, but a new start. May you take the universe's hand, and may he lead you into the infinite. I turned to the woman and asked what that meant, but she was gone. Story 4, I found a VHS tape in the woods by Cabbage Draconis. It was a typical Friday night. I was hanging out at my friend Tyler's house. Here's the thing about Tyler, he's crazy. Not crazy in a malicious psychopathic way but reckless crazy. Tyler and I first met in 6th grade. I had just moved from across the country and had trouble making friends since I had social anxiety and was shy. Once we became friends I came out of my shell. Tyler would always talk me into doing stupid things that would get us in trouble 90% of the time. Other than that though he was a cool guy. We liked the same nerd shit and I enjoyed the adventures caused by the things we did. Most of the time anyway. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. This happened when I was 16. I'm 17 now. On this particular evening, Tyler suggested we go to the woods near his house that night. I protested because there was no real point in going but after some persuasion I finally gave in. We set off around midnight. Tyler's parents weren't home at the time so it was easy to sneak out of the house without being noticed. As we made our way through the woods, I got sort of a creepy vibe from it. I know it sounds childish but I was legitimately freaked out. I felt a sort of presence. I felt like something had happened there. About an hour into our little trek, I stumbled across something strange. It was a VHS tape. It was just lying there next to a tree. I picked it up, clearly wondering why someone would leave a VHS tape in the woods. The sticker read Roth and the date was 1995. Ominous title, I know. I showed it to Tyler and he said he had a VCR in his basement and that since his parents weren't home we could hook it up to the TV and watch the tape. I obliged because I was curious to see what was on the tape. I highly regret that curiosity. After we got home, we hooked up Tyler's VCR, popped in the tape and settled back for whatever was on it. It started off with 6 children, 3 boys and 3 girls, playing in the woods. Strangely, it looked a lot like the woods we had found the tape in. I came to the conclusion that the tape had been shot in those woods and that whoever filmed it had left it there for whatever reason. The cameraman was talking to the children as if he was the host of a kids show or something. Every once in a while his hand would be in shot and he'd be wearing a blue and green mitten so he must have been dressed up as some sort of animal. After a few minutes of this, something terrifying happened. The tape cut to the children all tied up in a circle. They had scared expressions on their faces. The cameraman chanted something in a language I didn't recognize before taking out a lit match and throwing it into the middle of the circle. The children all screamed and thrashed at the ropes, but it was no use. The fire engulfed the kids and the tape ended as it began to die down and the screaming stopped. I felt like I was going to vomit, and I'm sure Tyler did too. The next day I turned the tape into the police and they said they'd investigate it. However, it's been several months and I haven't gotten a response. Last week, Tyler went missing. Strangely, the police department called off the search after just one day, but they said they didn't find anything. Ever since then, I've been researching crimes in the area in 1995 to see if I can learn anything about the incident. If you know anything about a child murder involving a kids show in 1995 in northern Montana, please contact me and I'll update if enough people want me to. I'm afraid I might be next. Story 5, I am not random by Shortstack 114811. I am not a random person. Everything I do, barring the occasional sneeze or cough, is set in a pattern. People have told me they suspected I was OCD, but I brushed them off. For me, it wasn't a compulsion. I didn't think my family would die or the world would end if I didn't flick my light switch off. I followed my routine because I was particular, nothing more. The regularity was comforting, because I knew what to expect, and what to plan for. Ask my family, and they will inform you of how meticulous I was as a child. The same routine, every day. Surprises were unwelcome, and their reveal never ended well. My friends and family soon learned to inform me of when events were to happen, though little me compromised by allowing the details to go unknown until the last minute. My teenage years were much the same. I never drank, or smoked, or went to parties. They interfered with my schedule, and were too unpredictable for my tastes. As were the individuals who partook in such activities, if I had to be honest. Then I became an adult, and nothing changed. If anything, I grew increasingly fond of the life I built up. Alone and predictable, but that was how I liked it. I never felt lonely, and my friends knew me well enough to practically read my mind. Though the days of the weeks held their own schedule, each week was the same. Work on Monday until Friday, except on Saturday, which was movie day, and Sunday, my time to clean the house. Should friends wish to hang out, it was after work or after the movies on Saturday. Always predictable, and always planned for. Never on Sunday nights. Again, it was my cleaning time, but also my time to catch up on the news. Henry Joe was my favorite news anchor, not only for the way he delivered the news but also for his reliability. Not once has he missed a shift delivering the Sunday news. Never. Except for today. Karen Tillman was filling in for him, stated he was at home with the flu. Karen was just as professional as Henry, but today was not her day. Today was supposed to be Henry's. I gripped the armrest. I didn't know what to do. My entire week was thrown out of whack. Every Sunday I looked forward to seeing Henry, and now, what? He wasn't there. My mind raced as I tried to think of what to do. I was an avid fan of his, perhaps it was time to visit him, something I'd always thought of doing. Looking at my calendar, I thumbed through my plans for the week. I had a few openings, spots where meetings had been cancelled ahead of time. From there, it was simply a matter of getting on the internet and picking out the best way to meet a sick man. Later that week, on Thursday to be exact, everyone was talking about the shocking murder that happened the prior night. Henry Joe, after ignoring calls all day Wednesday, was found dead Wednesday night by one of his colleagues. His door had been broken into, and he'd been stabbed multiple times with a knife. Several valuables of his had been stolen, as well. Everyone speculated on who could have committed this random act of violence, and why. The official story was a home robbery gone wrong, but some wondered if he hadn't been targeted. Someone jokingly suggested it was me, the least likely person to do any sort of random act. I laughed along with them. Randomness was not something I engaged with, for my entire existence was one of predictability and deliberation.